Welcome to my review for Fanatic, or, as it's called in the United States, Die, Die, My Darling. Why, America? Why? So this is a film about a young woman called Patricia whose fiancé killed himself at some point before this film begins in a car crash that he himself orchestrated. But before Patricia could move on and marry her new man, she feels compelled to go and see the mother of the fiancé that she lost, just to see how she's coping, maybe say goodbye. So she goes to stay at her cottage by this little canal somewhere. This woman's name, by the way, is Mrs. Trevoil. I might have butchered that, but it won't be the first time in one of these reviews. Once Patricia gets to this place, though, she realises that the mother is a little bit of a religious fanatic, hence the title of the film. And after the two of them have sort of butted heads over a 24-hour period, Mrs. Trevoil decides to imprison Patricia at her house and just keep her there permanently for two reasons, I guess. Firstly, a sort of revenge for the death of her son. Mrs. Trevoil blames Patricia for no logical reason, she just does. And secondly, she is of the opinion that Patricia badly needs indoctrinating in the way of the Bible. So for much of this movie, Patricia has to try and escape somehow, but helping Mrs. Trevoil keep her imprisoned are a whole host of employees that she has at this little cottage. So she's got a maid, a butler, a stable hand, and they're all in cahoots with her. This film reminded me of two very famous films when I was watching it, the first of which is Misery, so that one with Kathy Bates keeping James Caan locked up, and Caan has to spend most of the movie trying to get out. And the other film is Psycho from 1960. So there are times in this where Mrs. Trevoil seems to be speaking to her dead son out loud because she's a bit cuckoo. So whereas in Psycho, we've got the idea of a son trying to talk to his dead mother at times, here we have a mother trying to talk to her dead son. So the idea is kind of flipped, but it's easy for me to think that Fanatic is at least a little bit inspired by Psycho, as a lot of thrillers in the 60s were. I guess we can't say the same about Misery because Stephen King didn't write that until the 80s. We've got some different personnel here in terms of director and stars. So we've got a guy called Silvio Narrizano. Sounds Italian. I've never heard of him. I don't recognise any of the other films on his filmography. This was the first film he ever did, though. And I've got to say, for a debut, he does a very, very good job with this. And in the lead role, playing Patricia, we've got someone called Stephanie Powers. Again, completely not familiar with her. There is one recognisable actor in the film, albeit he plays a very small part. Now, if you've seen Fanatic, you will absolutely know who I'm talking about before I even say the name. It is, of course, the brilliant Donald Sutherland. He plays, well, I referred to this part as a stable hand earlier. That's not actually accurate. There's no stable in this film. There's no barn. Donald Sutherland plays a kind of, he's just like a helper around the house with a really low IQ. He's got an IQ of about 60, this guy. Now, I wouldn't normally make fun of people like this, but the way that Donald Sutherland plays this part is just hilarious. The facial expressions he gives out. I'm guessing this was sufficiently early in his career that he hadn't yet earned the right to get really big roles. And in 1965, actually, he was in another film that I really, really like, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. He was in one of the many stories in that film, but I'm guessing at some point not long after this, he would have gotten the stardom that it would always have been inevitable with an actor of this quality. I'm pretty sure he did The Dirty Dozen, late 60s. He would have had a much bigger part in that, I'm sure. Absolutely the strongest part of this is the characterisation. There are some really deeply drawn people in this film. So if we start with Patricia, okay, she's shown to be quite weak in terms of her escape attempts. She has several scuffles with the maid in this film, and the maid always comes out on top, even though they look of similar size. And the maid somehow manages to get both of Patricia's hands behind her back so she can tie them. It's not easy for one person to do that to another if they're similar size and a similar sex. And Patricia needs rescuing at the end like a damsel in distress. So she's not the best at helping herself, shall we say. Physically very weak, but the actress playing her does a very, very good job of making me care about her anyway. I think the character fares much better in the dialogue scenes. Mrs. Trevoil, I mean, this character could have just been a one-dimensional whack job, a bit similar to Mrs. White from Carrie or that woman who's in Silent Hill. But there are several glimpses throughout this film that there's something deeper going on within this character that I thought was quite impressive. So there's this thing in the story where there's no mirrors in the house because it's against Mrs. Trefoil's religious belief. She doesn't believe people should have the vanity to need to look into mirrors, etc., etc. But despite this, she still keeps a little mirror, one little mirror in her chest of drawers that she can't resist getting out now and again. Just have a quick look at herself, and then she admonishes herself almost straight away. She can't resist sometimes being the sort of person that she normally hates. There's another moment where she puts some lipstick on to try and make herself look a little bit pretty, and then quickly wipes it off because the Lord wouldn't like that. It's as if in Carrie we saw Mrs. White at some point look at some really hot guy in a magazine and gaze lovingly at him, and then suddenly flip the thing closed and like, oh God, I can't believe I did that. That's totally wrong. It would have added a bit more depth to that character if she'd have done that. Not that I'm criticising Carrie. Carrie is a classic film and still better than this one, I'd say. Amusingly, Mrs. Trefoil has this pistol in this film that she uses to occasionally threaten Patricia. And I'm not a firearms expert, but to me it looks German in make somehow. I swear I've seen this same pistol in war films. It made me think that maybe this film took place in the same universe as The Eagle Has Landed, in the same village where Michael Caine and his bozos parachuted down. And maybe after they left, Mrs. Trefoil went for a walk and found this discarded pistol in the bushes or something. The scene in this where she kills somebody, I won't say who she kills just so I don't spoil the movie for you, but that's one of the best scenes in the film. The use of colours in that scene is really impressive. There's lots of nice little touches from the director in this, which is even more impressive when you remember that it is his debut. Another one, Patricia just walking up to the house at the start of the film. There's these really gorgeous side-on shots where she's just tracked as she goes up to the door. Very, very strong directing. Harry's a really good character as well, good villain, very easy to dislike, but again, lots of depth there. I was never quite sure during this whether he would remain on Mrs. Trefoil's side for the entire movie or whether he would evolve into being a big bad on his own. The only thing I was quite sure about was that he was never going to help Patricia. But it feels like there's lots of tension between the villains in this film, but tension that's well earned, well set up. Not like what you see in your standard Texas Chainsaw sequels where the villains are just winding each other up a lot of the time just for the sake of it, as if the movie's trying to say, look, these villains don't just eat people, they get on each other's nerves, therefore they have character. The villains in Fanatic, Mrs. Trefoil, Anna, Harry specifically, it feels like there's stuff from years back bubbling away just beneath the surface that might just come out because of this ongoing scenario that's being played out involving Patricia. I did wonder about the relationship between Anna and Harry, because apparently they're married, but are they allowed to actually sleep with each other, or has Mrs. Trefoil banned that as part of her religious crusade? If that was the case, then it sort of makes sense, therefore, why Harry is constantly chasing after other women. But if these two are unhappy in Trefoil's employ, and I suspect that's definitely true of Anna, why don't they just leave, go somewhere else, have a different life? I mean, I think this film is meant to be set in the same year that it was made, 1965. But at times watching this, it feels like the employees of Trefoil are living in like the era of Downton Abbey or something, when maids would go and work for a wealthy person in a country house and then just stay there for their entire life because that's just the way things were back then. The scene where Harry chases after Patricia in the fields outside, one of Patricia's better escape attempts, it has to be said. I was totally reminded of Mad Max in that scene. It was like the Harry character was channeling not only Mel Gibson in his white vest, but also the giant man-child in that film. It felt like he was combining two characters from Mad Max, moulding them into one just for that sprint through the fields. Just after that, Patricia jumps into a canal, and it seems to actually be the actress, not a stunt double. And I thought that's quite impressive, jumping into a freezing cold canal, swimming across, and then Harry comes out in his speedboat, only just narrowly misses Patricia. I thought that's a little bit dangerous. I mean, he gets that wrong by a foot. He's going to take the lead actress's head off. Maybe if Tom Cruise was watching this, he'd tell me I was being over-dramatic and this is not actually a dangerous stunt. But it just struck me, because it seems to be in the same shot. You see Harry in his speedboat going right close to Patricia's head. Even if I was a stunt double in that scene, I would have felt extremely uncomfortable. Before I get onto my conclusion and score for this, I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got. Here it is. I've got a Blu-ray indicator copy of Fanatic. Sledgehammer suspense to shock you from your seat. It does have lots of suspense, I'll give it that. Was I shocked from my seat? Not quite, but front covers will often be dramatic. As is usually the case with Indicator, load of features with this. Sadly, no audio commentary, which would have been nice, but there's lots of little mini docs. I might check some of those out tonight. And the presentation of the film, absolutely tip-top, as you would expect with Indicator. Very happy with this copy of the film. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this. So we've got 1, 2, 3. 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. Probably the only weakness is the fact that the main character, Patricia, shows quite a lot of weakness at times, but I still liked that character on the whole. But everything else about the movie is really, really well executed. This is a well-acted film, well-directed film. I couldn't guess it all the way to the end, and it's thoroughly recommended. So there we have it, 3.5 out of 5 for Fanatic. You'll find all my other Hammer reviews, by the way, in my Hammer playlist, and I'll be back to do another one of these films very, very soon. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.